Hello and welcome to Dual Citizens, Series 2. Here at Dual Citizens, we're thinking about that great tension between living as a citizen of an earthly country, in this case, here in Australia, in the Southern Hemisphere, and the dual citizenship of being a citizen of heaven, as the Apostle Paul calls it, in Philippians. And how can we make dual citizens even better than it was before? Well, by having a dual citizen. So I'm delighted to be joined by Steve McAlpine. Steve, how are you going, mate?
Good to be with you. And I notice it's not dueling citizens, so we're not going to be fighting with each other. But also, we don't want to be fighting as such. We're not here to have arguments, right?
No, but we'll try and keep each other out of them, and hopefully some other people out of them as well. That's right. It's dual citizenship, as in, and a kind of a little play on both of us as well, because I don't know about you, but I'm actually an earthly dual citizen as well. I've kept this beautiful dulcet accent from back in the UK, and yet I'm a citizen of this great southern land here in Australia. And what about you, Steve? Tell us a bit about yourself.
Yeah, I'm also a dual citizen of heaven and earth, but also Northern Ireland and or the UK and Australia as well.
Part of the UK, yeah.
But yeah, look, lived in Australia most of my life, and as people may know me from such things as writing and blogging and things like that, where I think some of our tensions as we write and think about things, Dave, is how do you navigate what seems like a hot cultural moment with a gospel framework that doesn't lean into just being angry or fearful, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know you and I have been writing about current affairs and how that intersects with the gospel and what difference the gospel makes to how we think about these things for a number of years. You've written a couple of books, though. Spruik your book, Steve.
Yeah, so your new one out, Future Proof, How to Live for Jesus in a Culture That Keeps on Changing. And probably some of the things that we'll deal with over the coming weeks will be around those issues, I think. Just how it feels like a roller coaster in the culture at the moment, and a good time to be talking about those things. So we'll look at some of those things today, and I think we're looking at the new He Gets Us campaign at the Super Bowl.
That was we are.
Yeah, that took a lot of airtime. It didn't cost us as much airtime to put up as them. And then I think an ongoing one, which is a slow burn the last few weeks, is the controversy around Alistair Begg, pastor from Scottish guy, living in the US for a long time, about his pastoral advice about a grandmother who asked could she attend her grandson's trans wedding. And so that opened up a whole can of worms.
He's upset a lot of people, hasn't he? And then other people got upset because other people got upset. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think finally we're going to look at something a little bit left of centre, the tragic death of world marathon record holder Kelvin Kiptum. And just this last week, big news in athletics, I think.
Yeah, and that one passed me by, Steve. But you're a runner, aren't you? So that's probably just a little bit.
Tell anyone that.
I'm a walker myself, and that one kind of just passed me by. But I know you've got some thoughts on that, and I'm looking forward to hearing them at the end. Well, let's get started. Our non-dueling dual citizenship. Let's get on that roller coaster and see if we can't actually learn how to ride on it.
First thing we're going to look at is the He Gets Us ad campaign, which was during Super Bowl. $7 million worth of ads for 0.2 of a second, or probably a few more seconds of that. Huge ad campaign, and it's been running a few years, about trying to show Jesus in a positive light in American culture. So there's a little bit of background there, American culture and Jesus. But the ad campaign shows people washing each other's feet, and the words that shows Jesus, He Gets Us kind of thing. So there's a lot of graphic stuff going on, and you see different kinds of people washing different kinds of people's feet, which is a very Jesus-y thing to do, I suppose. But it's raised a lot of questions. It's certainly been a polarizing ad. Dave, you've done a little bit of thinking about this. What has been polarizing about this ad, ironically, given that it's an ad to try and dial down some of the polarization issues?
Yeah, well, one bit of me wants to go, it's America, so of course it's going to be polarized. Every simple flipping thing about America is polarized. I studied in the United States for a year 30 years ago now, 1993 to 1994. And the first thing that struck me, even back then, was just how utterly polarized every single issue was in that culture. I presume even more so now. So what's polarized? Well, just by being a thing, it's got polarized. But it's annoyed a lot of, we might call, more conservative Christians, because their critique has been, this just hasn't been an actually accurate depiction of what the whole Jesus foot washing thing is all about. But more than that, has it actually played into and reinforced some assumptions about the way the world works that actually aren't true? What's really interesting is, if you work your way through this sort of all these different images of people having their foot washed. I did a little piece on my website a couple of weeks ago of the 12 different images, and they're really well done, I've got to say. Like, the quality is really clever and there's engaging images. But of the 12 images, 9 of the 12 fit into what you might call a classic victim-oppressor narrative. So, you've got a cop washing the foot of a black man, and the sort of shades of the BLM sort of protests in the background. So it's the reversal of the way that we've been told to think the world works. The cops, bad cops, defund the police, BLM protesters protesting against the oppression of this culture. Well, that gets flipped around and here's the point of the ad, because Jesus doesn't function that way. So the cop comes in and he loves this black guy. And by implication, therefore, what Jesus wouldn't be doing is what would normally be happening is a cop hating on a black guy. Or again, you get an anti-abortion protester who you see washing the feet of presumably a teenage mum who's going to go into the clinic. Now, what's really fascinating about that one is, in the background, you've got a bunch of other anti-abortion protesters, and they're not portrayed as like sort of angry, hectoring. They're kind of actually pretty chilled, are leaning on a fence or something with their placards to their side. But the same thing's going on. Just think about what's happening there. They're telling me, Jesus, what would he be doing in that situation? Well, Jesus isn't a hater. He's a lover, because he gets you, a girl that's going into the abortion clinic. So Jesus comes and he washes the foot of the teenage pregnant crisis pregnancy mum. By implication, therefore, he's not doing what that anti-abortion protester would normally have done, oppressor victim narrative, which is actually, according to the picture, calmly and not in a really aggro way, protest against abortion and actually call out to say, look, please don't kill your child. So even that kind of gentler act of being at an abortion clinic and saying to women coming in, please don't kill your baby. There's got to be a better way. That, according to the paradigm which the ad is communicating, that's hateful. So
you think, look, are we straining at gnats and swallowing camels? Because some people are saying it's getting the idea of Jesus out there, and people looked up Jesus online when after the ad. Like, if it had been a beer ad, maybe they'd have looked up beer. But that's how advertising works. But what's it missing in your view then? Because you've said what you can see why it's touching on some of the issues that people think, well, if you're a Christian, you hate on some of these types of people.
Yeah. What's it missing? Well, I think, my God, it's missing who Jesus actually is and what he's actually come to do. So one of the main premises of advertising is you do speak to people's felt needs, but in order to then pivot them to what their actual need is. So in one sense, this is an ad that speaks to the felt need of a certain segment of society in America whose understanding of Christians and more conservative ones, let's face it, is that that's hateful. It's been oppressive of them, and so on. And so Jesus kind of he gets you. He gets you on that. He understands what that's like, and he meets you in it. Except that it's done two things.
Do you think that's just tapping into, say, the seeker-sensitive movement of the late 70s into the 80s, right?
Yeah.
It feels like that was, we scoff at that because it's a bit consumer-driven. But surely an ad doing that is probably saying, what is the felt need of this person that I could address in a same consumption model? Because it doesn't feel like it's very I want ads to be a little bit more shocking than that, I think.
Yeah, you kind of. Well, yeah, I think you and I, because of the way we are, we want to be a little bit more provoked, which is not necessarily a bad thing. Well, the critique of the seeker-sensitive movement was, did they ever get to the gospel?
Mm.
And that's kind of the critique here. Where's the gospel here?
Yeah. Did you
So
see
there's a
the Northern Irish young pastor in an hour or so put together a video called "He Saves Us."
yeah.
And
So a guy called Jamie Bambrick from Hope Church, Craigavon, he's put together
I used to
this
live
video.
in Craigavon, by the way, in a housing estate in the early '80s in Northern Ireland, on the outskirts of all the troubles. Heady times
Yeah,
indeed. But
yeah.
yes, I noticed it, and it's very well put together video. If you're going to provoke and showcase Jesus' superpower, I think that's what I would say. Do you think the first ad kind of failed on the level of marketing 101 because it didn't lean into the difference that Jesus is?
Well, I think that's one of it. I would say a couple of things. I think one, it bought into the. So people have a perception of what's going on in the world. Everyone's got their way of viewing the world. Increasingly, for many, it is this kind of victim oppressor paradigm, which comes from critical theory, and the books have been written about that. And what it does, I think what it did is it just buys into that and does no more than that. And the thing that is striking about Jesus is wherever he walks and whoever he talks to, he challenges people's perceptions of the way that the world is. We're just preaching through John, the middle of John at church, and I just opened up John chapter 7, and we're going to preach Jesus going into Jerusalem on the Feast of Booths. And what's really interesting is his brothers say to him, "This is a great time to go to Jerusalem, Jesus. Everyone will be there. You can do like a sign, and it'll just be great. Everyone will love you." And Jesus goes, "No. It's not my time to do that. Besides, by implication, there's another sign I'm going to end up doing in Jerusalem that's far more effective." But then he kind of sneaks in undercover into Jerusalem, and rather than doing the "oh, I get you all, you're all great" kind of line, sorry, it sounds a bit cynical, but I'm feeling a bit cynical about this ad.
Really, it's not coming through in the tone.
He goes in and he basically tells them all how they're wrong.
Yeah.
And he basically tells them all, you just don't get what's actually going on. You're viewing the world in the wrong way. You're being hypocritical in the way that you make the assessments that you make. And what's really interesting is that he's an equal opportunity offender. So he starts with the Jews, which in John is the leadership of the Jewish nation. But then he turns to the crowd and he basically just rips into them as well for their hypocrisy too. So not that I'm saying we need to, let's find some people to offend and slap them in the face, let's have a duel. But Jesus challenges us. And there's nothing challenging about this ad. In fact, what it does is it says to people, some of whom are sinning. I mean, can we just say that clearly? So, I mean, there are complexities to the abortion debate. I want to get that. But it's not a good thing to kill your baby in the womb. There's complexities to the issue of same-sex attraction. But ultimately, Jesus is really clear on where sex belongs and how it should be acted into. But the Jesus of He Gets Us just comes in and goes, I love you, you're great. I do get you. And if there is any sense of a call to repentance, a change of life, it's not there in the ad. It's frankly not really there on the website that they call you to either. And so that whole thing is missing. And so what's striking about Jamie Bambrick's video is it's built around the premise that Jesus comes in and radically rescues and changes us, which is the gospel, right?
Yeah. Look, in one sense, you're saying it feels like a lot of the heavy lifting has to be done by someone. If you said these ads are a conversation starter, I feel I'd have to unravel a lot of stuff before I'd get back to. So I want it to be a conversation starter, not a conversation inhibitor. Because if it does say love your neighbor, here's the other thing I would comment on. And Glenn Scrivener talks about this. Tom Holland talks about this. We think it's universal human values to love your neighbor. But that's Christianity.
Yes.
In that sense, right? So,
yeah.
And then your neighbor goes to you, well, I don't need Jesus to love my neighbor. I probably do more than you. And I look around at some of my neighbors and they do more than I do. So is Jesus sort of being sort of diminished in that because we're not saying this has just come from Christianity. You can't get this without Jesus.
So what does he bring? Like, ultimately, what is he bringing? All he's actually doing is ultimately, I think in this advert, he ends up affirming a worldview that actually we want to go, is actually really unhelpful and doesn't, if I'm constantly the victim in this sort of victim oppressor paradigm. And we should not kid ourselves that this is such a prevailing way of thinking in the world today. If I'm constantly a victim, then I'm not the one that's done anything wrong. I'm not a sinner that needs to come in repentance and know the glorious gospel of being forgiven by all that Jesus does for me. I just remain the person that really just needs to be vindicated, but not in the sense of just, proper biblical justification, but actually being shown up. And I'm going to add one more thing, Steve. I'm on a roll. The online chats about this have been great and fascinating to watch. And I think one comment that's really fascinated me that I read only just yesterday was someone saying, look, this is about, do we really get this segment of the society, and let's call them for what it is, it's more politically left-wing leaning. Do we really get them for who they are? Perhaps some of the more conservative response to this has been a failure to understand, to which my response wants to be, no. Actually, I think this response comes because we genuinely do understand what's going on here. Like, do you actually get what's going on for people when they view the world in this way? And perhaps that actual paradigm itself is not the right way to be viewing the world. And Jesus comes along and he says, no, I'm not going to play into your paradigm. I actually have come along to show you a far better, truer way to think about how the world works. I just don't get any sense of that at all in this ad. And although that's a lot of heavy lifting for one ad to do, like you say, the conversation, if you're going to have a conversation about who Jesus is and what he does, this ad feels like it's not setting me off in the right direction.
Yeah, that's interesting. Having said that, it doesn't say Jesus does get us. John 2 tells us that, but he doesn't entrust himself to the crowd, even though they trust him. They want to believe in him, but we don't get him. And at the end of John 2, in using the language, it says he would not entrust himself to any man because he knew what was in a man. And then the flip side is, the next verse is, no, there was a man of the Pharisees. So in one sense, neither side gets Jesus.
No.
So, I mean, and that's what we'd want to say too, because I agree with you on that very progressive framework is an alternate sort of gospel. But we've got to be careful we don't think just because we're on a conservative framework, Jesus is sort of going palsy with us as well. It's totally. None of us get him unless we get the gospel.
Absolutely. And conservatism with kind of the almost the hanging on to the moral framework of Judeo-Christianity. Well, that's just moralism, isn't it? Yeah. And there's a reason why the Pharisees get a lot of shrift from Jesus for their moralism and insistence. Like, insisting that people be good is actually the opposite of the gospel.
Well, if this were a Super Bowl ad, you'd have just spent $150 million for riffing on that for a while.
Money well spent, Steve. I think we kind of wrap that one up. Actually, I want to say one more thing, if that's all right. And it's this. I wonder if in this ad you've just got another example of people trying to make Jesus look good, Christians trying to make Jesus look good by actually throwing other Christians under the bus.
Good point.
So there are some images that are portrayed in this ad. So, let's take that lady protesting peacefully at an abortion center. Let's pick the non-controversial topic, say. She gets thrown under the bus, right? We just get told that's hateful. Jesus would do better. Jesus would do better. And it is worth asking, what would Jesus do at an abortion center? I'm sure he would have lots of love for the women going in there, lots of clear words for some of the activists and maybe some of the medical professionals in there. I just wonder whether he'd be doing that at the picket line or somewhere else. And you kind of need to be challenged, don't you, on for all of us on where would it be? I just think it was too easy to just flick that image and just dismiss it for where it is. All right, I've got to over budget now on Super Bowl ad. Maybe we'll turn to the next topic. So a good week or so before any of us were worried about who was going to win the Super Bowl or whether Taylor Swift was going to be there or any of the ads that were going to be aired, Alistair Begg, who is a Scottish minister who's been ministering in the United States for many, many years, and I would have said up to this point one of the go-to guys in American evangelicalism. He again, this is all about upsetting people. He upset a whole bunch of Christians by his answer to what is, to be fair, a pretty tricky question. He was asked on a panel the situation of a grandmother who's been invited to her granddaughter, I think I'm right in saying, grandson, forgive me, grandson's gay wedding. Let's call it for what it is. Alistair, what would be your advice to her? And Begg said, look, if grandma is really clear with her grandson on this matter, so there's no doubt that the grandma in this situation, what she believes on this, that marriage is between a man and a woman. That's how Jesus made us and affirmed it. And she is able to communicate that to her grandson. He said, nevertheless, it might not be a bad thing for her to go. In fact, he would counsel her that, she should go and show some love and take a gift, even though she's actually ideologically and religiously opposed to it. And the internet did what it did best, which is go nuts and divide itself again. And 'twas ever thus. So we'll think a minute about Begg's response and what we think of it, Steve. But first of all, why are we even being asked these questions? Like, I imagine that 15, 20 years ago on a similar panel, that just wouldn't even be a question that anyone would be being asked. What's going on here that we've been now being asked these questions? That's kind of the big question everyone wants to know the answer to, right?
Well, I think it's because there's so many moving parts and they're moving so quickly. So the way, I use the term a secular age, the whole idea of I find out who I truly am, I express myself to the world that way, and you should line up with that or you don't love me or whatever.
Yeah.
But the complexity is pastoral, right? It's because for many Christian people, the world of crazy sexuality was out there. It was something that was not within our sphere. Or if it was within our sphere, and it clearly was, because that's how, let's not be silly, it was hidden. And now it feels like it's out there and kind of celebrated, but also that there are members of your family sitting around your table who have worldviews and world practices completely at odds with yours. And you have to navigate your way through that. So the questions are being asked because grandmothers have grandsons who are getting married to trans people, because parents have children who say, if you don't call me by my pronouns that I prefer, you're not, I don't want to have anything to do with you. These are not abstract ideas. These are deep, painful pastoral issues that people are realizing all the time. And it feels like pastors are making it up on the run as to what response they could give. Now, I am a big fan of Alistair Begg, and I love listening to his stuff. And there's been no hint at any stage in his ministry that he's fearful of the culture or that he has shifted his view on sexuality. But he's dealing with a deep pastoral issue. Unfortunately, he just happens to have hundreds of thousands of people who listen to him every week because of the quality of his sermons. It's
not a problem we may ever have, Steve.
I think you'll be fairly safe there, Dave, in the train line out past Sydney CBD.
Right.
But I think that blows things up very quickly. And but it's because these things have come to our doorstep very quickly. And you see the shift that we could no longer say love the sin and hate the sinner. No, there's the other way around. Love the sinner, hate the sin. We can no longer say things are broken. Our culture says these are things you must celebrate, not just because they're sexual issues. The secular age idea I talk about is to do with because they're me expressing myself, and to push down on that is rejecting my authenticity. And grandma's hoping to be able to keep having conversations with people. So do you know what I'm saying there?
Absolutely. I mean, like, I'm thinking a lot about grandparents and their relationship with their grandchildren at the moment. My mum lives back in the UK. My kids are here. The other set of grandparents are in Singapore, where my wife comes from. And so, just thinking about the nature of those relationships and how hard actually you work to build them, and just as you grow up and you contemplate grandparenthood yourself, you're probably like me. You've got children who are probably biologically capable of bearing you grandchildren, and kind of the idea is terrifying and yet at the same time kind of appealing. there's something deeply lovely about a grandparent grandchild relationship, and so the need to want to preserve that, and the fear that it might be taken away. That's very understandable, and yet also this desire, as many of us have as dual citizens, just to we want to be faithful to the Lord Jesus
Yeah.
Christ. And how do we
That's
navigate
the
that?
issue, right? So what's coming down
Yeah,
the line? Well, this
that's
is
right.
where the conflict was. So you got a pastoral concern coming down the line,
Yeah,
and a
yeah,
deep commitment not to affirm something that we don't
yeah.
believe is marriage. And so what you're getting, you're saying it's unfaithful for you to go and celebrate something that God would not recognize or
Right.
celebrate
Yeah,
or affirm as a marriage, and you doing so is celebrate is affirming something that isn't real, and your very action of doing that is compounding the problem in the culture. And do you see how those two things are never going
it's
to? Yeah,
well on the basis of being liked or getting it right. It's just lose lose, isn't it? It's just either way, you're going to lose. And so Begg gets handed this live grenade, and the pin gets pulled out, and there he is. What do you actually make of his response?
okay. I'm going to say that my advice would not necessarily be to go.
Yeah,
I'd say I'd be very careful about that. But I know people that have done and people that haven't, and they're both firm Christians. But what I saw, and I think this is probably the issue, what I saw was a swarm, right? So that's doesn't deal with the issue kind of dispassionately. So this is a make or break issue, and Alistair has shown that. And it was unfortunate to read lots of quotes. He's clearly given in. He clearly doesn't believe the gospel anymore. He's a heretic.
oh
All these
yeah,
things. And I think if I were a Christian watching a swarm, I'd say it has all of the. By that, the swarm mentality of you pounce on the guy, you shred him, and off you go to the
yeah,
next person.
yeah,
I would say that has all of the characteristics of a non-Christian swarm. And you watch those and you go, there, someone's just gotten shredded. They've been told they're wrong. They've been told to repent. And when they do repent, guess what's not coming back? The request to speak at anything, the writing engagements, the friendships. It's like everyone's a psychological being, and Alistair's probably doubling down a little bit because he goes, even if I give in to you, I know I don't want to read his mind, and this is the other thing I'd say.
yeah. You don't know what's going on in there, do you?
I don't think he's going, oh, I'm scared, because I've never seen him scared or heard him scared about anything. He's saying there's
Yeah,
a difference between how I would respond to this pastorally and a whole group of people saying there's a culture we've got to hold tight, we've got to recover, and you are pulling a brick out of the wall.
well,
That's
Steve, let's talk about the reaction to Begg in a moment, because I think that merits some further exploration of whatever happened there. I just want to go back and just ask you a question about what you said before, which is, and I think our listeners will want to hear your response. You said, look, I don't think my advice would be the same. I don't think I'd say go. Just to unpack for a minute
yeah.
why you would. I think that's the position I would take as well.
Mm.
Having actually gone to one of these things for a TV thing I did a while ago, but I think then it was really, really clear what my
Yeah.
role there was, and it certainly wasn't affirming. But what's just the basic rationale behind that position, which says don't go? Because I wonder if a bunch of people listening, watching to us would go, well, what is the problem with going?
Well, you can only preach through Daniel so often and talk about
Yeah,
not bowing down to the golden image when the umpire band strikes up,
yeah,
and then not apply it to your own life in the clinch moments. And so for me, I go, that is actually, and Doug Wilson, who I don't agree with about a lot of things, right? He did say, he called same-sex marriage same-sex mirage. And that, to be honest, what he's saying there is that this is aping something. It's mirroring something. It's wanting an affirmation that this is also true about this relationship. Now, I
yeah,
get that people who, two same-sex people can love each other, but is that God's framework for what marriage is? No,
yeah,
because I think there's a creation issue and a natural law issue that it's leaning against, and I think there's a new creation issue that it's it's rejecting as well, and there's a Jesus picture. Now, not everyone who gets married is a Christian, but God gave marriage as a created order, and I think that partly because of where we're going in the West, in the post-Christian framework. It's a deconstruction of the created order.
Yeah.
But the problem with that is grandma's not sitting there going, if I go to my grandson's trans wedding, I'm pulling a brick out from the created order. She's going, I just want to love the guy so that in a month's time when they come round for lunch, we can look each other in the face. And all of the warriors, I suppose, on the conservative side of that say, no, this is a totalizing make or break deal and grandma should
Yeah.
never do it. Yet I think there'd be people in their own churches who are sitting there silently praying, please don't let this happen in my family because I don't know what I would do.
Yeah, well, exactly. But why can't grandma, like in your view, why can't grandma go and just sit quietly in the back? They know where she stands, and then hopefully when they come back from their honeymoon in a month's time and have lunch with her, she's in a much better position to continue talking to them about the goodness of Jesus.
Well, some people are going to say that she can, right?
Mm.
And that won't be unfaithful to the gospel. I do think that it's the little things, right? It's always the little things. It's our little decisions about things. It's our little statements. And I don't think that there was any sense that grandma was approving of it, and grandson probably knew that.
Yeah.
But it just chips away at you. And I think that's probably more my issue. I don't think this is the landing at, on the beaches of Normandy. I think this is just a little chipping away that our cultural moment has to go, no, we can love you beyond agreeing with you. And so perhaps that's the issue, that in one sense, the courage of your own convictions, but not even your own convictions. In one sense, if God is big in your mind, other humans aren't too big, but they're not too small either, right? You don't despise them. They're just the right size. They're human size, just like you, and they're going to make mistakes, and you're going to make mistakes. But if you say, look, I love you, but I can't go to it because of my conviction about marriage, you can't determine what their response is going to be. You're not in control of that. You're never in control of that. You can't control another person. If you've ever learned anything in marriage, it's that, right? You cannot control another person, and nor should you.
Yeah, and frankly, given the nature of the debate around marriage, and if grandma wants to continue to have lunches with her grandson, it's going to come up anyway, isn't it? So whether I'm, not going to the marriage isn't going to avoid the confrontation when it finally comes. I might just add one thing from my own perspective, Stephen, as well. I obviously marry people as a minister, as I know you do. And one of the things I do when I'm using the prayer book preface is we say, Bruce and Sheila have come to this point, which we believe God has come to. And they ask us to join them in this prayer. And we effectively serve as endorsers of what's going on and witnesses of the promises made in order to hold them accountable too. So there's a sense in which, for me, conscience speaking, to go to a wedding is to by its very nature to endorse the thing that is there. And going back to the previous conversation we had about victim, oppressor, and being liked and wanted, and you're hated if you disagree. You are seen as approving. Just the very nature of business. So, you've got to work out in your conscience. Now, Begg took it a certain way, and the internet, as we said before, erupted. So let's think a bit more through about what's going on as people respond to Begg. Like, what do you make of it? What's driving this kind of response to him? From here, we might say from the more conservative, politically conservative side of American evangelicalism. What's at stake here that people feel has been so radically attacked? What do you make of it all?
Well, if I read the responses, everything. And that's perhaps the issue for me, right?
Yeah.
Everything's at stake. So that it cannot be simply seen as Alistair Begg making a pastoral error in light of his theological conviction, which generally is pretty robust. It has to be seen as a betrayal of the direction that we're going as a culture. And I think that's the issue. So when I do read that he should repent, you're always going to double down when you're told that anyway, right? But
sure, mostly, yeah. He picked up the fact that it's different between the UK and the US.
And
Hmm.
so he's been able to be in America for 40 years, 30 years,
Wow. Yeah.
and be completely seamless, right? But the groups that cancelled him or don't want him coming, I'll just go with the Groucho Marx line. I don't want to, join any club that would have me as a member. Perhaps. But because I think it feels like everything's at stake in that context, that's what's been said. So I don't agree with Alistair in that
Yeah.
sense, but I think he's a good man. And I think his pastoral advice maybe wouldn't be the wisest I would use. And I think for the reasons you've said, what are the chances of a person marrying a trans person in a ceremony that feels more civil, where they open the prayer book and ask you to affirm together under? It's low, not
Sure.
impossible, low,
Sure.
right? So it does feel like mirage. So it doesn't feel like you're actually. So you can see why grandma might go. But when everything is at stake, and when this is the touch point and the sore point culturally, it feels
Yeah.
like a complete betrayal, which is what happens when you're never as angry with your opposition as you are with the person who betrays you from within. Just ask a political party. And that's
Yeah. Well, that's been in the news, hasn't it, here in
yeah,
Australia?
and
More
that's what I
recently.
think's going on there at some level. Plus, I
Yeah.
don't agree with Doug Wilson that what Alistair thinks he's doing is different to what Alistair's actually doing. Alistair's giving into fear, and I'm going, oh, I'm not so sure. But I think you can't judge his motive because
Yeah.
he
Yeah.
said one thing, but I think it's because everything's at stake. But I do think, and I will say this, public affirmations of things do chip away. There's no doubt about that. But in one sense, if you're a dual citizen, everything's not at stake. That's what I'm going to say, and that's perhaps hard.
And so you'll make your mistakes along the way, and you'll get it wrong. Sometimes you'll get it right. Jesus is coming back, and ironically, probably the more I think this is what you're communicating, the more I get that Jesus is coming back, and He's actually the one that will sort everything out. The less anxious I get about all those little things along the way, and perhaps it might free me to ironically actually make better decisions about them along the way. Now, let's just talk a little bit more about this everything's at stake thing. What is it about the states, do you think, that
Hmm.
makes that be the case? Because it's really interesting that we watch. Here's my observation: we sit either in the UK or in Australia in these westernized anglophone countries, and we get a lot of American stuff all the time, but we are not the United States. And it does feel to me like more recently we're just importing more of the American assumptions and paradigms about how society and political things work, and so on. I think we saw some of that in the COVID debate.
Well, that's true left and right. Yeah. So,
Feeling,
in one sense, the first issue we talked about, which was the He Gets Us,
yeah,
this is the flip side of that from the other
yeah,
political divide, right? So, I, I'm able to say I don't think Alistair got it right without thinking that he has been a Benedict Arnold, to use a good United States traitor example, right?
yeah,
To the cause. So I think one of the things we say is um, perhaps American understanding of civil liberty, the way the place was founded, the documents. There's a hagiography going on about America's foundations, right? Which
yeah.
I don't think.
There's a battle going on, isn't there? Like, are you a 1776er? Are you a Puritan guy? And the racism and slavery thing wrapped up into that? Is this the great nation from which the rest of the world ran to be free, or is it actually just a disaster of a place? And that's a big debate. That's existential for how Americans see themselves, right?
It is. And the other thing you'd want to say is when you conflate the two citizenships into one citizenship, everything's at
Yeah,
stake. And that is not to belittle the implications of going to such a wedding. I'm saying I still think that. But when you conflate, if your view of dual citizen is that they're starting to morph into the same kind of country, then you've got a few problems, I think. I think that's critical.
yeah. So, what might be some helpful things we can say to our dual citizens sitting here, maybe in Australia or the UK or wherever else, where we go, look, guys, we're not America, and that means maybe we just need to think some things through a little bit more. What might be some of those things that we want to think? Is there anything we can learn from it?
I would say don't look over your shoulder to see what everyone else is thinking you should do. Right? That's true of both of those situations we've talked about today. Like, it's responding to, I guess, extremes, and then not bringing the gospel through clearly. I do think that it's true that it would be, it is a mirage, that it's not marriage, and I wouldn't want to celebrate such a marriage, such a, what's called a marriage. So I think that's true. But how that's played out in different places is just the assumption in the UK among evangelicals is we've never held the country. It's never been the Christian country that everyone talks about. We've had enough conflict about everything. We had to leave to go to America if you were a Puritan, if you were a dissenter. And so America's based on dissent, right?
Yeah, enough, yeah.
At that level. But you have to manage it well and say, get good advice, but do it quietly and not online necessarily. So one thing I'd also say is, and Mere Orthodoxy wrote this to say, why is everyone jumping online to give Alistair advice? Surely in any church setting, there's a process that you go through, whether you're a Presbyterian or an Anglican, where decisions are made by people within the denomination about the decisions that you've made or the things that you've said. But it feels like America goes, if you've got a camera and you've got a microphone, you've got an opinion on it, and it's just as valid as everyone else's. So yeah. I look around the statements that are made, and I don't see denominational leaders being put forward to say it. I see personalities. It's very personality driven.
Yeah, well, we got a camera and a microphone. I don't know if we've worked out if we have any personality yet, Stephen.
Yeah. But we've got enough one of us between us both. So that's good.
It could be.
We should move on, right?
I think we should move on. Let's turn to our last topic, which is the untimely death of Kelvin Kiptum. Now, this was, for me, it's a name I almost didn't recognize. Kelvin Kiptum, as I understand it, is the guy that is going to be, if anybody he would have been the guy that cracked 2 hours for the marathon, which again is so out of my world. The notion of running a marathon itself is just so out of my world that I'm not there. And it seems, and you can probably correct me and get the details right on this, he had a car crash back home in Kenya, and he's gone.
Yes.
And I am reading some stuff around it now. There seems to be some other stuff that's going on around it. Like, who knows about that?
Maybe don't believe the conspiracies, right?
Yeah, maybe you can enlighten us. But is that the nuts and bolts of it, Steve?
Well, because Eliud Kipchoge has been the GOAT of marathon running, and who ran a sub 2 hour marathon under certain conditions, which wasn't a world record. We thought that'll never happen. And then suddenly a young man comes along who's running 250 Ks a week training and runs three marathons. In his first 3 marathons, they're 3 of the fastest 7 marathons ever run. And his last marathon was the world record at Chicago, 2 hours.
And he's for real, right? Like, this is the real deal. Yeah.
Real deal. And everyone's looking to him to set the pace because there's no one coming up behind other than that. But I guess the key for
literally as well.
He's got.
I didn't want to miss that one.
Daylight to second. Yeah. Suddenly, minor car accident, slide on road, into ditch, into tree. He and his coach are dead. And the key is the shock, right? It's how I felt, even though it's lost in the memory hole just pre-COVID. Kobe Bryant dying.
I was going to say Brian, and actually the other one that I was thinking about was actually I can remember when Princess Diana died. And I've been rewatching The Crown online and just reliving, and I remember that moment and actually being awake at 4 a.m. for some reason on a Sunday morning and listening to the news in the UK and going, she's dead, and just going,
that cannot be, right?
Like, it's wow.
Yeah,
like, it's just
that's the point, isn't it?
And it's not like our parents dying, which I know is something that you and I have grappled with recently. Like, that's awful, but you kind of get it. So what is it about not just young people, but famous, relatively young people? Well, now more people are younger than us, but what is it about them dying that actually just grips us so much?
Well, death. The beautiful, young and gifted should live on, because in our minds we're saying that beautiful, young and gifted, Sonna, gives you the right at one level to keep going. But death like that stops us in our tracks and makes us think about our own death. There's a reason why when someone died young in the past and they had a memorial for them, it was a column that was cut off, shattered, because it's saying this should not be. This
Right.
should not happen.
Parents don't bury their children. Yeah.
Yes. And I think, to be honest, as I'm reading the athletics world, it's the shock and the sheer disbelief at that, not simply because he was, his world record was ratified 5 days before his death by Lord Sebastian Coe, the great British runner, who, if he died today, you'd go, terrible, world record holder, but he had a good innings. He was 70s.
Well, he had a good run. You might.
He had a good run, yeah. Short, much shorter.
I would like to do that, Steve. I know.
But it's also, when you go back to a public figure and you realise that he was about to run another marathon in April and he was looking to break the world record on a fast course or break the 2 hours on a fast course, and you read his hopes and goals and dreams and suddenly they're gone. It's the goneness of it.
Yeah. And he was dedicated. I've been reading a couple of the news articles about him, and this is the guy who's, I think we've got to say, his kids didn't get as much time with him as maybe they should have done, because he's like, actually, no, I've got to go and do another training session, and I've got to.
He had
a
24-year-old with a wife and 2 children. And that's obviously Kenyan. So he's, the average Western athlete who's 24 isn't thinking of marriage till they retire, right, in their early 30s or whatever, generally. Not always. But suddenly he's gone, he had 2 kids, and he has a wife and kids who are a widow, and kids who've got no dad now. Just like that. Yeah. And now this is the thing, though. In sub-Saharan Africa, death is the everyday occurrence, whereas for us it's a shock and it shouldn't happen. But you speak to enough people who've either worked as aid workers or missionaries in those parts of the world, death is the fact of life in their experiences. But this is a shock because it shouldn't happen to the young, the gifted, the beautiful, and it does. And I think it's a timely warning for us. All death should do like that is make us think about our own mortality, because we don't. We sort of mask it with overseas trips and white goods.
And this hadn't occurred to me beforehand, but it's kind of why we actually still need to keep having good funerals, don't we? We keep moving to this kind of celebration thing where we want to celebrate the life, but there's something. The funeral service. Yeah. Funeral service is. I mean, you've led them. I've led them. I'm an Anglican. I use a proper prayer book. But you basically go, we've gathered today and we want to mourn the loss of this person, and we want to show solidarity to those who are here. But we are reminded of our own mortality, and it's as though Jesus slaps every one of us in the face and just says, you could be next. Are you ready? And the job of the funeral service is to go, here's Jesus. And if you're with him, you are actually ready. So how might we, you may have given this some thought, Steve, how might we use an event like this, or even this event, to leverage that way? Because it's not enough, is it? Just to bring us full circle, it's not enough to go, you're feeling really bad about this. Do you know what? Jesus gets you in that. He understands your sorrow. No, that's not enough, is it? That's not enough.
No, and this is perhaps where I think that many of us in a Western setting who are a little bit more don't lose this nonsense of you'll go to heaven when you die. We're waiting for the resurrection day and the last day. Yeah. When you're disembodied, there's something unnatural about that. And unless Jesus has broken death and destroyed death, you have no comfort. And I feel that that's probably what Western Christians have to rediscover, the fact that their one comfort in life and death is that they are not their own, right? They belong to God and Christ. And the thing for me is that the resurrection of Jesus is the thing that, to be honest, gets me out of bed in the morning, because as I get older, I go, I sat with my dad as he died. And the night before he died, he was alive. And the next morning, when I don't say this facetiously, looking at his body, which was like wax, and was not him in that sense, that's going to be us. And unless you're sobered by going to the house of mourning, as it says in the Proverbs, better to go to the house of mourning, you'll learn something. Unless you're sobered by that, you can take it flippantly. And if you're not sobered by death, or you hide away from it, you won't see the radical nature of what Jesus actually did when he rose from the dead.
That's right. And actually, I don't know what your experience was, Steve. So mine was similar to yours. My dad died, obviously back in the UK, so I didn't get to see him before he died. But I did have the experience a couple of days later of going to the Chapel of Rest and seeing his body. And you're right. You and I in our job have probably seen more dead bodies than most. And it's that person is starkly dead.
Yes.
Like
They're not in the next room. They're not. It's not like they're asleep. It's very
there, and but here was my thing, Steve, and this is the resurrection thing I think coming through. I sat in the plane on the way home a couple of weeks later and just went, "All right, Oldie, you're almost 49 years old. Like, what are you doing? Like, how are you going to use the rest of these years that God has given you well?" And what was really interesting was that gentle, quiet conviction. Yes, I will be raised one day. And actually, it is pointing people towards Jesus that now actually makes the only sense of maybe the 25 good years I've got and then the 10 beyond it. And we've got to have better aspirations than just going, I refuse to grow old and be a grumpy old man, right? I want to gather my grandchildren around me, whether they've been lesbian married or not. Just more than that, surely, like almost death makes you go, what's the point? And if we haven't worked out what the point is, we're just not going to be able to deal with it, are we?
No, we're not. And people don't. That's why they want to take control of it in things like, I want to end my own life my way, because they realize that that's a myth. That's a fiction to try and say I'm in control of death. Death controls us, and the fear of death shapes our lives according to Scripture.
Yeah.
And Jesus breaks the fear of that, right? We've been held enslaved by it, whether that's by sheer fear or by sheer pleasure covering it over. We're enslaved. And I think for me, it's heading up towards 60 in a few years' time. Where did that go? Life doesn't seem short. Life is short. And for Kelvin Kiptum, for me watching that, it was a stark reminder that one day, I might be interviewed about something and talking confidently about what I'm going to be doing in 2 months' time, and tomorrow I could be dead, and to be ready for that. And I think that's the sobering fact of what it means. And that's partly why it's good to be a dual citizen, because I don't want to be homeless. I don't want to be exiled away from the place that's true home when this citizenship ends.
And place my confidence in the wrong things and feed the wrong things. I mean, that's the glorious thing, isn't it, about how Paul writes in Philippians 3, having set out just how wonderful the resurrection is and just going, that's it, I'm all in on the resurrection, just going, the world around us, it's God is its stomach. It feeds itself, which is what you do if you're not sure how long the food's going to stay on the table and it all looks pretty good. I mean, maybe you're more disciplined than me, but I don't know. There's nothing worse than a banquet where you've already paid you've paid $1. Get all those crab claws that you can get it in. But then he goes, but our citizenship is in heaven, and we await from there a savior, and he will be the one who transforms us. He will be the one who guarantees our future. We're hanging out for that. So every death around us ought to be an opportunity to reflect for ourselves and make sure that we're clear.
Yes.
But then look around us and just go, well, how am I most effectively reaching out and appealing to these people who have just been confronted with the only real issue, the properly final issue that everyone has to face.
Well, I'm sure as we wrap it up, that's going to be a conversation I have running with some friends who aren't Christian in the next couple of weeks, because they'll talk about it, because they're sobered by it and what it means as we get older. But so I think that's a good way to finish. It's a sobering way to finish this episode, but it feels like unless you have an understanding of who Jesus is and what he's done across all of these issues, you're either going to be fearful or fighting, or you're not going to be sure where you belong. And I think that's critical to understanding what we're doing.
Yeah. Well, here on Dual Citizens, we are thinking about where we belong. We're living in this world now, but we belong to the Lord Jesus Christ, who's coming back, and we belong in that new creation he's going to make. It ought to radically change everything. This has been episode 1 of season 2 of Dual Citizens. I am David Ould.
I'm Steve McAlpine.
We would love to hear more from you about what you thought of this episode, what you want to be looking at us to be looking at in episodes to come, because we will be back with more Dual Citizens.